Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've gone over the majority of the staff recommendation. There is a considerable written recommendation that I'm sure you've had an opportunity to look at in your packets. There's one item that I wanted to touch on. Well, first, let me pause for a moment and ask my counterpart in the Public Works Department if he has any comments.
I could briefly, very briefly, go over a few items on my staff report. As has been indicated, there is existing infrastructure in the area. The improvements that have been proposed include briefly the following: Karen Drive to be widened to a 28-foot wide curb and gutter roadway. Parking would be allowed on one side, the south side of the street. Stormwater retention has been proposed with the subdivision utilizing the pond that's on site. In addition to that, there's been some additional proposals both to the north and to the south. A series of swales and berms have been proposed on the south and along the east side to intercept any of the drainage above the wooded area along the property lines to guide that drainage to the north and to the east. There is a facility that's in the woods currently, but there are problems, as Mr. Bates had indicated, and so that terrace would basically then intercept any drainage flowing to the south and to the east and capture it and on a fairly gentle slope and direct it to the creek area to the north. On the north side, there's a berm coming from a drainage facility at the end of the cul-de-sac. That drainage from the water from the street would then be directed by another berm to the north and to the west to the retention pond, and then the pond would then serve as retention for basically everything on that north side of the property, and then allow the overflow spillway to act similarly unless there was any need for any improvements at all, which would come with the final plan to direct drainage to the creek area to the north. As far as sanitary sewer is being proposed to be extended both from the north and to the south. There's a existing manhole on I believe it's Pierce Street that the main would be extended from the north to serve the properties or the proposed units on the north side, and then also there's an existing main on the south side of the property that would serve the facilities on the south side of the proposed cul-de-sac. Sidewalk is being proposed 5 feet wide along the south side of Karen Drive. In regard to the trip generation and street and traffic impact, Eric has included trip generation information for the development, both for the apartments and for the 2 new units of single family, for a peak hour generation of 18 trips per day or per hour in a peak hour situation. The zoning code actually requires that if a peak hour generation of 100 trips per day were generated by the development, that would trigger a traffic impact analysis or study. I think we're definitely under that threshold, so we feel that at this point there should be minimal impact in regard to the traffic impact from the proposal. We do ask that site distance be quantified at the intersection of Karen Drive with Taylor Street. That's a typical item that we want to try to get addressed on the preliminary plat, just to ensure that we have, and I believe from just our site visit that there is adequate distance and site distance from that intersection. As far as utilities, fire hydrants and streetlights, those facilities have been proposed and also exist to meet in the area, and what's been proposed has also been shown to meet current city standards and requirements. There are a few minor technical corrections, but for the majority of the comments that have been proposed, those have been addressed on the latest submittal of the plan and the plat.
Okay, any questions of engineering? Yes, Chris?
Shane, if I understand, can you read this? You're taking all the water, or the intention is to take all the water off of the street and take it to the pond?
Yes, that's correct.
So then you should be helping everybody on the south side from any increased runoff. They should see no, other than possibility off roofs. Correct.
Yes, and in fact, with the berm where it's in place on that north side where the pipe comes from the cul-de-sac, I think the majority of everything on the north side should be intercepted
And taken to the pond.
and taken to the pond as well.
So the only thing that should,
So really anything that if there are issues that are along the north side of the creek, I'm thinking that the pond would actually defer those in some respect.
is it gonna be large enough?
That's something that we'll need to go ahead and actually quantify if indeed this is a preliminary plan.
I understand.
And so in the final plan, those items as far as the calculations are further refined. So if need be,
What's the storm you use?
we use the 10-year storm in residential areas for enclosed systems. We'd actually, for the berms and the swales, probably be looking at the 100-year design for those since they're an open channel.
Okay.
So we would look actually at that pond and see if if the calculations required any kind of modification to address our standards, then we would want to take a look at that then during the final design.
So you may actually be slowing down the flow into the creek.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions of engineering? Mr. Block, Mr. Bates, you all contend with the engineering report? You're working with the city on that? Yes, sir. Okay.
Just to touch on a few items. There are a few future steps that if this plan were approved, the developer would have to go through. One of them is a final subdivision plat. What is up on the screen is just a preliminary plat. The developer would have to submit a final subdivision plat, which would appear in front of this body. As long as it's in conformance with the preliminary plat, then it would essentially be in an approvable form. And then also a final PUD plan. This is just a preliminary PUD plan. Now, a final PUD plan has some of the engineering and technical details that would have to be submitted to the city staff for review. The review and approval of a final PUD plan is administrative in that we, as city staff, review that plan. And again, as long as it's the same as a preliminary, an approved preliminary PUD plan, that would be approvable from on the staff level. Obviously, any amendments, changes to the PUD plan would require the developer to come back in front of this body, and again would require a public notification procedure. Regarding the staff recommendation, again, I think I've already outlined that for you. The recommended form of motion is in 3 parts, as you can see at the very bottom of the staff report, planning staff report. Number 1, motion for approval of the requested amendment to the development plan map of the comprehensive plan to show the property as high-density residential. That would be necessary in order to support the developer's proposed apartment development plan. The portion of that property, that's applicable to, is just lot 4 as shown on the plat, so just the area outlined in green. Number 2, motion for approval of the request to rezone the property from RS4 medium density residential to PUD planned unit development. Again, that's just for lot 4 of the plat. And then number 3, motion to approve the preliminary PUD plan and preliminary plat with the following conditions. And that is compliance with the comments and technical corrections of the planning and engineering divisions. There's a few minor technical details that still need to be addressed on the plat. With that, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Any questions of staff? Seeing none, the chair now will entertain a motion for the first motion as you have on your staff recommendations. Someone want to take that on?
Before I make the motion, I do want to say that I always try to look at these things as to how I would feel if it were going to be in my backyard, and I personally think that while there are some problems that Eric pointed out, from an overall standpoint of how this would affect that, potentially affect property values, as well as the fact that the majority of the green area is being left, that there's a pretty significant buffer, I think is going to be a big factor in helping this property, as well as the fact that it'll be under one ownership. I think that's also a positive. So having said all that, I would move that we approve the requested amendment for the 7.4 acres to the redevelopment plan, or the development plan map of the comprehensive plan to show the property as high-density residential.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion on the motion on the floor.
I'll just have to, the way I feel about it is if this property is gonna change, no matter what we do. I mean, it's not gonna stay the way it's been for the last 50, 60 years. If this is a brand-new subdivision where new houses are being built and all of a sudden they came in the middle of it, wanted multifamily, I would say no in a heartbeat. But there's no way this piece is ever gonna fit into everyone's little happy home. I think I would hate to see McKinley opened up, and I would hate to see Pierce Street opened up. I think that would just destroy your neighborhood. And then on Wilcoxon, you'd have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 houses right in your backyard with the barking dogs and their parties going later in years. I understand you're not wanting it to change, but I think the least impact on all of it would be the multifamily with this huge green areas all around it. McKinley Street always be like it is. Buchanan Street would never be opened up, and Pierce Street would be closed. I live in that area. I know it well. I mean, I look for a little dog all the time. I live on the other side of East McCarty Street, so I've been over there a bunch of times, and I really think once it's settled, you guys would be happy it happened this way. There's a lot of little houses up and down the street. So that's my say.
Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Roll call.
Jack Beacon,
Aye.
Dean Dutoy. Chris Jordan.
Aye.
Michael Lester. Dave Nunn.
Aye.
Dale Vaughn. Chris Yarnell. Kevin Thaynen. It passes 7-1.
That motion is passed 7-1. Dave, would you like to take the second motion on?
Sure. I'd move that we approve the request to rezone the property from RS4, medium-density residential, to PUD, planned unit development.
I second that.
Have a motion and a second. Discussion on that motion. All in favor of that motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Roll call.
Jack Beacon,
Aye.
Dean Dutoy. Chris Jordan.
Aye.
Michael Lester. Dave Nunn.
Aye.
Dale Vaughn. Chris Yarnell. And Kevin Thaynen. And that passes 7-1.
That motion passes 7-1. Dave, would you like to take on the third motion?
I would move that we approve the preliminary PUD plan as well as the preliminary plat, subject to any staff recommendations or changes.
Second that.
Motion and a second on the floor. Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Roll call.
Jack Deacon. Dean DeTroy. Chris Jordan. Michael Lester. Dave Nunn.
Aye.
Dale Vaughn. Chris Yarnell. And Kevin Thaynen. Again, that passes 7-1.
That motion passes 7-1. Is that all the motions we need on this, Eric?
Yes.
Okay. Our recommendations will now go forward to the city council. The city council will, you can go there, they'll have a public testimony, you can testify there. We have guidelines we must follow. The city council is a political entity. They can vote any way they want to. Do you have the date that this will go before the city council?
The date that it would be in front of the city council for a public hearing is December 17th. And that meeting is at 6 o'clock here in this room.
Okay. Thank you for coming. Anybody need a recess? Next case, P 12018, 1850 Route C rezoning from PUD to C2. Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, to orient you to the location of this particular request, up on a screen is a location map. You'll see that the intersection of Southwest Boulevard and Route C is right there where I'm pointing with my mouse pointer. Schulte's IGA is right there. And across Route C from Schulte's IGA is a piece of property that's currently developed with a retail strip mall. There's a Mexican restaurant, newly installed Subway restaurant, and several other retail units within that building. To the west of the building is a portion of, again, the same property that's, the air photo shows it, air photo on the screen there shows it being filled, but that fill operation has largely been completed, and I think I have a picture of that later. The property is currently zoned PUD, Planned Unit Development. You'll see to the north of the property is an RA2, high-density residential zoning district. There are several apartments up there. To the east of the property is some undeveloped property that's zoned C2, general commercial. This request is to rezone the property from PUD to C2, general commercial. The purpose of the request is to essentially to establish a traditional zoning district or designation on the property in place of the PUD zoning district. As I'm sure you're well aware, the PUD district does require an extensive amount of time in terms of review and public process associated with that. The developer or the property owner would like to step away from that and be subject to the normal zoning requirements of a commercial piece of property. Is proposing a C2 zoning in that regard. This is an air photo of the property, 2011. Again, you can kind of see the fill operation being conducted there. The developer has expressed interest in developing that portion of the property, essentially establishing a commercial building on that part of the property. Oh, and let me back up. With the idea being that likely, although we have not received any specific development plan, is the property would be split in two and a separate lot created here to be developed separate from the existing retail building, and an easement platted across the retail building's parking lot in order to provide access to Route C. Route C is a MoDOT-controlled highway. Here's a current picture of the property. You can see the fill area, although there is a tree in the way, but that area has been largely filled and leveled in anticipation of future commercial development. I will jump ahead to the staff recommendation. The area is very commercial in nature. Up on the screen is an excerpt from the comprehensive plan development plan map that does show the property as being intended for commercial use. So the rezoning request is in conformance with the comprehensive plan, and staff supports the request. And I think that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Oh, the history on it is originally it was zoned back in the long ago. There was a lot of commercial areas in town that were zoned C4, which was a planned commercial district. And I think the idea there was they weren't quite, they being the city, weren't quite sure of exactly how development might proceed in some of these areas. And in order to, one, provide a little flexibility, and two, kind of safeguard the area from anything extremely obtrusive being placed there, it got zoned in a planned manner. And then that was maintained for many, many years in that area. There was a request. This property here on the corner of Southwest Boulevard and Route C. Let me go back to the zoning map. There was a small portion of that property that was zoned PUD, and the rest of it zoned C2. And that property owner brought forward a request to get that small portion zoned C2 just to provide uniformity of zoning on his own property. Nothing's been developed there, but the area has largely been developed, and I think the PUD is just a holdover.
So the PUD was put in place not necessarily by the developer, but by the city. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't want to comment too much on how
I'll comment on
okay.
it. It was put in place by the city many years ago.
Okay.
And part of it was to, just as Eric suggested, because the development plans were unknown at the time. So it was to preserve some degree of control, some degree of development review for the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. And plus some of the infrastructure in the area hadn't been planned out. Highway C was either a new highway or had just been planned. And so to help preserve the right-of-way for that, a lot of the PUD or C4, old C4 zoning that you see around
Okay.
town was derived from those reasons.
City request, not
Yep.
developer
Yes.
request.
Any other questions of staff? Okay, who is here to present this case? P 12018-1850 Route C rezoning.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Bates, Central Missouri Professional Services, 2500 East McCarty Street. I think you've got really good background on the project. As staff said, the area immediately adjacent to Southwest Boulevard and Route C was rezoned to C2. The original 3.49 acres was developed as a C4 PUD. That property is I'm going to say 70 to 75% developed now, with the limitations of the current zoning ordinance that include landscaping, parking, etc. In addition, the area to the west on Route C, which will probably accommodate somewhere between a 6,000 to 9,000 square foot building when you take into account the restrictions for parking, landscaping, etc., plus the fact that a detention basin, and Eric, if you could back up to your aerial, is actually much better than my visual that I provided to the commission. The upper left-hand corner is actually a stormwater detention basin. The fill slopes in back of the building exist. It really is not practical to extend that building. And then if you look at the very shaded area just below to the lower right of the detention basin, very steep fill slope. Real limitations on the pad, and what the owner, Mr. Guffey, who is here tonight, he'll be happy to answer any questions that I can, has found is that when he gets to a point where he can move this last phase forward, the people that want to move are wanting to move quickly, and we're looking at least at a 90 to 120 day process by the time we get something together so we can formally submit the application. From my perspective, there's very little, and in my opinion, no risk to the commission or the city by changing it. It's gone so far that you really, I guess, folks, I'd say you really can't mess this up now. So we're kind of over the hump, and the infrastructure, and I will mention that Assembly of God Church is to the left. Their property is for sale, and we're working on their site design for their relocation. I won't be surprised if somebody comes in. The properties are separated by a very deep ravine, not practical from today's economics to fill that ravine and connect the properties. The property to the immediately above is owned by Mr. Bothy. We're working on a development plan for him for senior housing, and we've actually worked with Mr. Albert on some things at the corner there, which, you know, based on the size, has some limitations. So I guess from our perspective, this is makes a lot of sense because of the need for the developer to move on this final stage. Be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Bates, you weren't inferring that previous commissions had messed things up, were you, sir?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I'm really suspecting when that was Zone C4, I was on the city staff, so I probably share more than commission in any concerns you'd bring up. Thank you, sir.
There, one item that I did mention, I'd like to briefly correct, that no development plan has been received for the property. We haven't received any like engineered development plan. We have received a concept drawing for a general retail type of use for that property. Beyond that, I'll leave it to the developer and the property owner to comment.
Anyone else here would like to speak in favor of this proposal? Anyone that would like to speak in opposition to this proposal? Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff is in support of the proposal. The proposed rezoning is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. The recommended form of motion is a motion to approve the request to rezone the property from PUD to C2. Be happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions of staff? Any discussion by the commissioners? Chair would entertain a motion to that effect.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the request as submitted tonight to rezone the property from PUD to C2.
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Case P12019, I think that's a zoning text amendment. You're going to briefly talk about that. 15 seconds, you told me?
15 seconds. Got to be quick. We're actually postponing this to the December meeting. We are doing a pretty extensive overhaul of the cell tower section of our zoning code. I think I've presented some of the stuff to you in the past, but I'll give a more detailed description along with the actual ordinance, which at this point I think is about 15 pages long, maybe a little longer. It'll hopefully be in your packets for the next meeting.
Okay. Any questions of staff? Okay. Case P12020, final subdivision plat of Loggy Ridge subdivision, section 1, staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first phase of a development that would probably be in two parts. The first to orient you to the location up on the screen, you'll see the intersection of Southwest Boulevard and Route C that we were just talking about. If you go down Route C and when you get to Veith Drive, take a right and go up, and then look off to your right. You'll see an undeveloped farm, and you also see it from Route C. The preliminary subdivision plat for this piece of property was approved by this body in September. Essentially, the subdivision will be platted in two phases. Up on the screen, you'll see section 1 consisting of the western half of the farm, and then a future section, section 2, at some future date for the eastern half of the property. This is the preliminary subdivision plat that was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission in September. You'll see that it basically consists of two cul-de-sacs, one coming off of Route C and a smaller cul-de-sac stubbing off of that, and then another cul-de-sac coming off Veith Drive with a smaller cul-de-sac stubbing off of that. Again, developed in two parts, starting with the western half. And this is the final subdivision plat that is before you for approval. The zoning is RS2, single-family residential. The size of this portion of the property is 17.38 acres. Consists of 29 lots and one reserve tract. The reserve tract is for a proposed detention basin that my counterpart in the Public Works Department might touch on in a moment. Lot sizes, the smallest is just over 10,000 square feet, and the largest just over 49,000 square feet, over an acre. All of the lots meet the minimum width and area requirements of the subdivision code. There are street names, June Court and Wyatt Court, June Court being the longer cul-de-sac, and then Wyatt Court being the stub off of it. There was a variance approved by this body from the minimum cul-de-sac length of 800 feet in order to allow June Court to be slightly longer, 900 feet. And then sidewalks are indicated on the improvement plan portion of the development along the south side of June Court and the east side of Wyatt Court. There's also a couple greenway easements that are shown on the plat. I believe it's right there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shane. To get down to the idea being a potential future greenway going up this drainage basin. Let me go back to maybe the idea of a possible greenway going up this drainage basin at some time in the future. We wanted to be able to preserve some sort of connection to allow members of the subdivision and as well as the public to access any potential greenway in that area. And I believe that's all I have. I'll pass it off to Mr. Wade.
As far as infrastructure goes, the proposed subdivision, the roadways are proposed with curb and gutter, and I believe parking on one side. As far as stormwater detention is being proposed with the subdivision, there is an existing pond that is proposed to be drained on the property, and then the existing dam for that being utilized for the proposed detention facility. Separate tract has been proposed for that to eventually turn over to the city for maintenance. Sanitary sewer has been proposed throughout the subdivision to serve all the lots. Sidewalk, as Eric had indicated, is proposed along all the proposed streets. Also, sidewalk would be required along Veith Drive as well. Access to the facility will be from Veith Drive for section 1. Site distance has been previously quantified along Veith Drive for the new street and for the proposed lots along Veith Drive. As indicated on the previous preliminary plat, the lots along Veith Drive would have driveways with turnarounds on the lots so that vehicles wouldn't back out onto Veith Drive. The corner lots on the new street would access from the new street only, not from Veith Drive. All facilities as far as utilities, fire hydrants, and street lights have been proposed to meet the current city standards, and there may be some minor comments in regard to infrastructure on the improvement plans and plat, but the majority of our comments have been addressed on the plan and the plat.
Any questions of staff at this time? Okay, who is here to present this case, P12020, final subdivision plat?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Bates, Central Missouri Professional Services, 2500 East McCarty Street. I've got two things to say. Number one, thanks staff for skipping that issue about the telecommunications. I appreciate that. Number two, I'd like to introduce the Loggy family because they've got to witness the process, and now they probably have a real appreciation for what the commission and the staff deal with on a regular basis. And number three, I think I told you I'd only have two things. I'll be happy to answer any questions and go home just as soon as possible. Yes, sir. I think the owner will have to tell you because there were some. Somebody got them.
Any questions of Mr. Bates?
Thank you, sir.
Is there anyone else here that would like to speak in favor of this proposal? Anyone here that would like to speak in opposition to this proposal? Seeing none, we will close the public testimony. Staff report.
Staff recommendation is for approval of the final subdivision plat, subject to the following conditions. Number one, compliance with the comments and technical corrections of the engineering division. There's a few minor technical corrections that still need to be resolved, as is common. And number two, finalization of improvement plans and plat prior to introduction to the city council. That's a very important item that we work with consultants to make sure it gets done. We will not introduce a plat to the city council unless all the improvement plans have been finalized.
Okay. Questions of staff? Discussion by commissioners? Chair will now entertain a motion to that effect.
I'd move we accept the final subdivision plat, subject to any staff recommendations.
Discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. Other business, scheduled reports. Mr. Lester, do you have a report from environmental this month?
Actually, I don't have a report. There was no meeting last month. So no report.
Okay. Thank you for serving on that committee. I'm not recognizing you. Ms. McMillan, would you like to talk about this communications on reference sidewalks on Missouri Boulevard?
Yes, I just wanted to share that with you. We are getting a lot of positive feedback from the public regarding our sidewalk construction program. The sidewalks on Missouri Boulevard were actually constructed with assistance from Missouri Department of Transportation Enhancement Grant. Prior to that, though, the Department of Public Works, under Pat Sullivan's tutelage, installed some of the bus shelters and bus pads. So we're really happy that the sidewalk is connecting all of those, and transit patrons have a place to walk along Missouri Boulevard to catch the bus. People who are walking to their jobs on Missouri Boulevard now can walk on a sidewalk, at least on one side. So we're making some progress. Just wanted to share that letter with you.
Okay, thank you. Do you have something, Eric?
Yes. Adoption of the 2013 meeting schedule. The meeting schedule is in your packets. The dates there are all the second Thursday of the month, as is standard. I do have one request of the commission. I would like, for personal reasons primarily, to move the July 11th meeting back 1 week so that it would fall on July 18th. The purpose is so I can take a vacation. The idea is that me and my new fiance are going to, well, be married by then and ride our bicycles across New York along the Erie Canal Trail, and an organized bike ride that takes place the second week of July every year.
Are there motors on those bikes?
Oh no. No, it's several hundred miles, like 400.
I'm just curious.
Seriously. I can't remember if it's 400, but it's pretty long. 300 maybe.
How did it end?
I think it's about 7 days.
Old fiance,
So.
new fiance.
Yep. We have a very small staff, obviously, and so that another benefit of that is a lot of the pre-work that we as staff do before a meeting, takes place about 1 week prior to the meeting, and by moving it back 1 week, we would move that away from the 4th of July holiday, which tends to kind of put the crunch on us as staff in order to prepare for a meeting, especially if there's a large agenda. But by establishing it 1 week later, at this point, it would accomplish those two very important things.
Well, I have a question for you. You said it was a new fiance. Did you have an old one?
No. Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah.
I just wanna know if we're getting invited to the reception.
It'll be in New York.
Are you looking for a motion, Mr. Chairman?
I think it's a pretty shallow reason, but I guess I would look for a motion, Mr. Yarnell.
I move we accept the schedule with the adjustment in July going to the 18th, correct?
That's correct.
Any other discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Thank you.
Opposed, nay. It's passed. Ann, could you get the adjusted one out to us then
Betcha.
sometime?
Plus,
Okay.
everybody will receive a meeting notice too.
Alrighty, thank you. Anything else? Thank you for coming. We're adjourned. See you
Thank
next
you.
month.